Okay, 2 minutes after the hour, we're going to get started. I know lots of folks are still coming into the room to join us. But Marshall, good morning. Where in the world is Marshall today?
I'm in Rancho Santa Fe, California.
Great. Those of you who know Marshall knows that all of his emails begin with greetings from wherever he is in the world. And so it's always a fun greeting. You send Marshall an email, and that's kind of, I wonder where in the world is Marshall today? So look, welcome. Some of you know one of us. Some of you know both of us. I thought I'd just start. In a moment, we'll take this off the screen. You'll be able to see us full screen. But, Marshall and I have known each other for about a decade now and are friends and colleagues. And among other things, we have a group of colleagues, and including some people you may know, like Beverly Kay and Jim Kouzes and Sally Helgesen, who meet once a year, kind of like the same time next year in San Diego. We've been doing that for a long time now, and really get together and share ideas. So, Marshall, welcome. Great to be on here with you. So we decided, go ahead.
Very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks. And so, each of us just put out another book, and those of you who kind of follow our work know we're just forever writing books. We don't know when we'll stop, but we're both kind of always putting out new ideas. And we just thought, what a great chance for each of our respective kind of people who are interested in our work to get a chance to peer into the other's work. So again, in a moment, I'll take that slide off the screen, but we're here today really to talk about our two most recent books, the one that Marshall wrote with our mutual friend and a great expert in her own right, Sally Helgesen, How Women Rise, Breaking the 12 Habits That Hold You Back from Your Next Raise, Promotion, or Job. And my new book with my colleague, Jeff Vanderwielen, The Purpose Revolution, How Leaders Create Engagement and Competitive Advantage in an Age of Social Good. So Marshall, let's start there. You've written a lot of books yourself. How many are you up to now, by the way?
This will be written or edited number 38.
Wow, 38. Fantastic. Ben Franklin said.
Now, three of them have been New York Times bestsellers. Many have been purchased only by my mother, my father, and assorted relatives.
Yes, indeed. Well, Ben Franklin once said, some people have a book in them, some have a library. So obviously, Marshall, you have a library in you. So Marshall, why this book? Again, I know often people wonder with authors, why this book at this time? What made you and Sally write this book on how women rise? Why did you feel it was needed?
Well, it's interesting. It was a very random event. A guy named Mike Dulworth, who's an acquaintance of Sally and me, sent us an email and he said, crazy idea. He said, Marshall's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, is a great book. It's largely about issues faced by men. And he said, why don't you write a book like that for women? Sally called me up. We had a dialogue and said, why not? So we did. And it's been, so far very, very well received. We got a huge advance. I was a little surprised by that. And so I think it could be a very popular book. We wrote it all before a lot of the issues with women that are out there today happened. The book was already much done by then. So it's been a very fun, exciting project. Sally and I have known each other for many, many years. We've known each other for over 20 years. And so it was great fun for me to work with her. She's the lead author of the book. And so she put together the part about the women, and mine was really on the behavior change and behavioral issues.
Right. So almost like what got you here won't get you there, but more specific for women and some of the unique challenges and opportunities that women may face. And of course, Sally is one of the world's leading experts on that conversation. So a nice marriage.
Yeah, she just got listed today in Forbes as the world's premier expert on women in leadership, which is a nice acknowledgement today. I think I sent you an email about that, so that's good. How about your book? You wrote another book on purpose. Now, you've written on purpose before. Let's talk about your book about the purpose revolution and why this book and why now?
Yeah, well, I have been writing about purpose for a long time, since my first book, Awakening Corporate Soul, in 1994. So I was kind of a pioneer in that conversation. But I felt two things were true. One is that most leaders, and whether they're a frontline leader or a CEO of a large business, don't really understand the revolution that's coming in terms of expectations. the way that customers, investors, and employees want not just to have all the things they've always wanted, but they also want to buy from, work for, and invest in companies they believe in that give them a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. Mm-hmm. And in the book, we really share some overwhelmingly compelling evidence about how big this tsunami is and why it matters whether you're leading a team of 4 people or a company of 400,000. And then the second thing, Marshall, is there's a fascinating survey that Harvard did where they asked global CEOs whether they thought purpose would make a difference in terms of their success of their business. And they said on every metric, they felt embedding purpose in their company would make a difference. 83% of the global CEOs said, yes, it matters. But then only about a third of them said they felt they were doing a reasonably good job of activating it in their company. So we felt like while lots of people have written about purpose, no one's really given you the blueprint. How do you really embed it in your organization authentically so that customers, employees, and investors will feel it and become more loyal because of it? So most of the book is devoted not to the revolution, but to these hundreds of interviews we did with companies from, Ford to 7th Generation and Patagonia, 3M, who are winning in the revolution. And so we give people a blueprint, again, whether you're a leader of a small team or a big organization or an entrepreneur, how do you actually do it? Because most companies are failing at something they know is important. So that's why I felt the book was so important to write.
What I love about what you're doing is I think it's good at multiple levels. One, it's good on the broader macro level for society and the world. If everyone did this, the world would probably be a better place. Number two, though, it's very good at the micro level. I mean, I've done a lot of research and shown what matters in life, and 2 important variables are happiness and meaning. 1, you need to enjoy the process of what you're doing, and 2, you need to find it meaningful. It has to have a purpose. So I love what you're doing for both reasons. 1, I think it's good for society, and 2, at the same time, at the micro level, it's good for individual human beings, that their lives are going to be better.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why in the book, we spend a lot of time with a lot of really practical exercises people can do to connect to their own sense of purpose and embed that in their work. And, just on that point, Marshall, Amy Wierzinski's research at Yale University shows that people who see their job as a calling, who really feel they're serving something that's important to them in their job, not only are they happier, but they perform better on every metric that we care about as leaders. So the cool thing, as you said, is it's good for society and it's good for your personal life, but it also happens to be really good for the planet and your business. So it's like a quadruple benefit for people. And so we tried to work on all those levels in the book.
Yeah, I love that concept.
So, hey, I'm curious, again, especially because in some ways you were coming new into this conversation about thinking about women in particular. What do you think are the 2 most important ideas that might surprise people or be really new and interesting ideas that you share in the book that you'd like to share today?
Well, I'm going to talk about what the book is, also what the book is not. The book is really not a book about politics. It's not a book that takes a value stance and says women should do this or that. What the book says is, as a woman, if you would like to achieve higher levels of power, this ways to help you do it. I mean, everyone agrees, not everyone, most of us agree that the world would probably be better if there were more women at higher levels of power, and there aren't. You look at the Fortune 500 numbers, they're pretty low. And so why not? Well, this talks about not what society does or the big social issues, which, by the way, Sally and I believe those are all real. That's not what the book is about, though. You can read about that in the newspaper. The book is about what women can do themselves on a day-to-day basis to either advance or inhibit their career. For example, the average woman in 360-degree feedback gets better feedback than the average man. Our good friend Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner have worked on this. And, they have research from thousands and thousands of people. The average woman gets better feedback than the average man. The average woman is harder on herself than the average man. One coaching I have for women far more than men is please do not be too hard on yourself. Women tend to be very, very self-critical. And in the book, we talk about our good friend Frances Hesselbein and how I was her coach. And she got fantastic feedback, yet immediately went into a litany of things that she needed to improve, which, by the way, as her coach, I failed to see myself. She just went. And the other, sort of the opposite side of the same coin is women are hesitant about self-promotion. They have much more hesitancy to feel they should promote themselves. And a lot of women have, I'd consider, the reasonably naive belief, my good work should speak for itself. Well, I mean, that's ridiculous, as if God is going to fly out of the sky and recognize your good work. My good work should speak for itself. If that were true, no company would need a marketing function. All you'd have to do is make good products and people stand in line to buy them. Well, what we talk about in the book is really women need to focus on their own careers. And one other one I love about the book, well, there's a lot of it I like. Another one I really like is women are much more likely to focus on their job at the expense of their career. They sacrifice their career for their job, which means is they get so focused on doing a great job at the micro level, they're not really spending their time on building the relationships, on learning what the next level requires. And it's almost a catch-22. Many women can relate to this example. You do a fantastic job. They give you more. You do a fantastic job. They give you more yet. You keep doing a fantastic job. You get more and more, and then you become almost indispensable.
Right.
So what happens is, if I'm your manager, I'm thinking, well, you know, she's pretty happy and she's doing a great job and she does everything. How about not promoting her? Let's promote somebody else I can afford to get rid of here. And if we're not careful, women are not careful, they can literally sacrifice their career for their job, which is a very, very unique issue.
Yeah. You know, I love build on a couple of ideas you said, and I know people might be nervous, two men talking about how women rise, but just remind people that, you know, Marshall wrote this book with Sally, who's, as he said, you know, literally the world's expert on this subject. But I love the two things that you talked about are really interesting. I was thinking about in all of our lives, our weaknesses are often our strengths used to excess. Right. And like one of the strengths of women is their self-reflection. Men often are blind to our faults, but you're saying taken to an extreme, I'm overcritical of myself. Women are more diligent, I think, often than men. You know, mothers much more diligent than fathers. That's why you don't want the father with the kid most of the time, you know, because the mother's more likely to keep them safe, right? But that might keep you focused on your job, right? And of course, in our society, women were taught not to be too, you know, out there, right? Especially in previous years. So maybe women learned to, you know, not promote themselves as much. So I love, because I hear what you're saying is these aren't weaknesses that women have. They're actually strengths that they have. But when used to excess, when not develop the shadow side, just like men might have the opposite. You know, we brag too much and we might over-focus on our careers and not enough on our job, right? So I can actually see the flip side of that as well.
Right, exactly. And, you know, for example, men, a basic issue is winning too much, always having to win, be right. Whereas women might have a little more hesitancy to feel like that they are right in meetings or in environments. So I've taught a lot of classes for women. And ironically, I'm usually the only man that's there in the whole room. I think because I'm a Buddhist, they figure, what the heck, the guy's a little weird anyway. So we'll have him teach the women's. Right. So I'm often the token man at these women's programs. And what I have noticed is the concept of guilt, of letting go, very, very important for women. Letting go of that need to be perfect. Letting go of the need to be the perfect everything to everyone. Wife, mother, father, wife, mother, friend, relative, boss, team member. Perfect. Yeah. So women do tend to have a lot more of this issue of perfectionism and a need to please others as opposed to men. And this is one that I just see is very unique. When I teach my classes for women, I start out by saying we're going to have 4 rules. Rule 1 is for the next 10 minutes, you cannot try to learn something. Put away the pencils and paper.
Right.
They start getting confused. Rule 2 is you can't try to be more productive. Rule 3 is you can't think about becoming a better person. Right. Rule 4 is you can't even think about helping others. Many women get tears in their eyes. And wow. I just want you to focus on your own happiness for 10 minutes. Yeah. I did this with a group of women in India. 2 women just broke down. Nobody ever gave them 10 minutes.
You know, it's interesting, Marshall, when you said that, because I was thinking when I wrote my book, The 5 Secrets You Must Discover Before You Die, which, you know, as you know, was a PBS TV series, and I had interviewed all these people who were over 60, who were identified as the wisest older person someone knew, people from all over the world, just average people. And what really struck me was very few women regretted not being there for others, whereas men often regretted, as they look back on their lives, not being there for others. But women often regretted not being there for themselves. And it really fits with what you're talking about. So I'm not surprised from those interviews that I did that you would hear that many women, having seen that, would maybe be moved to tears. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. What about purpose? Let's go back to your book, The Purpose Revolution. Again, if you had to say, you've given me a couple of good points from the beginning. If you had to say, here's how the world is different today than it was, say, 30 years ago, what might be some of the highlights that you talk about in the book? Yeah,
well, so one way it's different is that I think the place that work plays in our lives has fundamentally changed. 30 years ago, work was mostly a way to make a living. Even except for the highest level professionals, work was just something you did to make money. People didn't really expect meaning and purpose. If you had it, it was a bonus.
Right.
But today, about 85% of people globally say work is an important part of their identity, not just a way to make a living. And of course, now, men and women, couples, everyone's working. We're devoting sometimes 50, 60 hours a week to our work. So I think there is a desire for people to say, if I'm going to invest all that time and energy, it's got to mean more than just a paycheck to me. So I think one thing that's changed, and it's of course most poignantly felt among the young, where 50% of millennials say they would take a pay cut to work in a job that gave them a sense of purpose or a company they believed in. And in my work, because I'm out there every week speaking and working with companies as you are, whenever I say that, I have tons of millennials come up to me afterwards and baby boomers at the end of their career saying, I'm doing that. It's not just something I say on surveys. I took a pay cut. I took a different job. I left this company because I wanted more meaning. I wanted more purpose. That's one thing that has changed fundamentally. The second thing is that on the consumer side, there's what I call a kind of nascent feeling within people that their consumption gives them a sense of guilt. So people feel like it's great that I'm consuming, I'm driving my car, I'm buying these products, I'm getting to live the good life, but what's the consequence? What's the consequence for myself, my own body? What's the consequence for people? What's the consequence on the planet? And so I always say this is a revolution about ends, not or. So I'm not in la la land. It's not that people only want purpose. They want both, right? Products that excite them, at a great price. And I want to feel this company's doing good and certainly doing no harm. I want a job with a great career ladder and I want to be recognized. I want a great salary and I want to go home at the end of the day really feeling that I have made a difference. And I think what has also perhaps changed is that with the age of the internet, you can't hide anymore. Like 3M, one of the companies I feature in the book, they say when they go to university campuses now and interview for scientists, the best and brightest students come up to them and say, I think I want to work for you already. I just want to know if it's real because I've heard about your reputation. And then there's the Monsantos of the world that go to the job fairs and no one comes to their table and they don't know why. And it's because in the age of the internet, I don't have to know anyone who works for you anymore to know if you're worth working for. So I think, Marshall, that has also changed, right? And whether it's on the customer or the employee side, you can't hide anymore. And your story can't look authentic, but not be authentic. So that's why in the book, I spent a lot of time talking about how do you really make your authentic purpose visible to your employees, visible to your customers. And if it isn't real, how do you make sure it's real, right? Which is the first thing, right? You have to have a purpose in the first place, bigger than making money.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. There was one connection I never made between what you're doing and what Peter Drucker taught me. He said that in the future, more and more managers are going to lead knowledge workers. The definition of a knowledge worker is they know more about what they're doing than their boss does. Well, if the boss knows more than the subordinates, the boss can tell them what to do and how to do it. And the subordinate can do what they're told. If the subordinate knows more than the boss, they can't tell them what to do and how to do it. They have to ask, listen, and learn. And in a world of knowledge workers, meaning is much more critical than a world of people that were not knowledge workers. I mean, basically, if you're showing up and in an assembly line, I mean, you can stretch it all you want to, but it's hard to get, I'm in an assembly line and we're putting together dog food cans. It's hard to get a huge amount of meaning out of that.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And so what happens, though, is more and more people are not working on assembly lines. Those factory jobs are pretty much going away. And you're dealing with people who are in a knowledge economy. And for the knowledge worker, they're more educated. They've thought more about their life. Their work, as you said already, is much more connected with meaning. So I think in the new world, everything you're talking about is much more relevant with knowledge workers than it was with people who are not knowledge workers.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And even in those factories, the robots are doing a lot of the kind of, work that used to just be manual. So even the people who are in your factory, now you need their discretionary brain and their effort, right? And so the jobs that are left are actually more interesting. But that also means, as you said, not only are those people going to be more concerned about where they work, because it's not just a job, but also you need more of them. So if there isn't a sense of purpose, and again, back to that research that we share, that, hey, on every metric we care about, from productivity and service to whether they call in sick, people who see their job as a calling perform fundamentally different, then boy, the stakes are really high, not just for attracting people, but even that guy or gal on the factory floor. Am I getting everything I could get out of them? Well, not if they don't have a sense of purpose, not if it doesn't give them meaning. Not if they really feel at the end of the day it's just a job, right? So that's maybe the big transition for leaders is, I always tell leaders when I'm talking with them, you have to stop thinking about your people the way you think about your family dog. Right. See, I'm a big dog lover. Most people think their dog does the tricks for them for the treats. But they've done fascinating research that it's not the treats that motivates the dog. It's the hug, the attention, the interaction with the owner. So I think leaders forget that. We really think, they're here for the salary. They're here for the paycheck. No, they're here because they wanted to add value to their life. And once you understand that, and as you said, the knowledge worker phenomenon increases that exponentially in terms of the impact of that for an employer.
That's right. It's very,
and same thing on the consumer side. One of the things that's fueling the purpose revolution is the rising middle class in the developing world. Because when people are in poverty, they don't care if this product is bad for planet or bad for other people. But in China, they'll tell you as soon as all these people came into the middle class, they started saying, hey, we want clean water. Hey, we want to know where the product came from. Hey, are children making this product? Suddenly people in the middle class start to ask questions they never asked before. And that's why it's a global revolution, not just a, let's say, North American revolution.
Well, also in life, we talk a lot about the problems in the world, and we often don't talk about some of the good news. The good news in the world is, and Jim Kim is president of the World Bank, his mission is the eradication of extreme poverty on Earth. He's a great friend of mine. Extreme poverty on Earth is an all-time low. A lot of Americans have no idea about this, but extreme poverty on Earth is at an all-time low. It's far lower than it ever was in history. And as you mentioned, when you're in extreme poverty, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're in the survival mode. Well, you want to eat, right? Everything else doesn't matter too much. Well, extreme poverty globally is just going down and down and down, which is a very positive thing. And everything you say then becomes more true, not just in the, quote, developed countries. It becomes true around the world.
Yeah, exactly. That's why, for any global company, this is such an important issue, because actually the fastest rise in the purpose revolution is in the developing world, partly because, as you said, they began at a lower level in terms of Maslow's hierarchy, right? And so, Marshall, I'm curious, in this book, who would benefit from reading this? By the way, if you want to ask us some questions, there is a chat button there on your thing, and we'll be taking questions a little later in the webinar. Again, we have a full hour, so hang in with us. So, Marshall, who would benefit most from reading this book, you think?
Well, this book is predominantly for women who want to make a larger impact and influence in the world. What's the definition of power? Power is influence potential. And if you want to influence the world, you need power. Well, this is for women who would like to have more potential to influence the world, more power, and it's strategies to help them get there. And by the way, in our book, we don't make any value statements. We don't say women should want to have more power. We're just saying, if you do, this book is designed for you. If you would like to get ahead in the organizational world, this book is designed for you. If you'd want to move up that ladder, this book is designed for you. And by the way, if you don't care, that's okay. This is not making a value judgment. It's not saying you should. There's another difference between women and men we found in our work. That is, for women, much more than men, and it's back to your point, power is influence potential. They want to have the potential to influence the world in a positive way.
Yes.
Well, if you don't have power, you can't do that. A common question I get is, how do I influence someone when I have no power? Well, if you define power as influence potential, that means how do I influence someone I have no potential to influence? Well, you don't. That's it. Prayer maybe is an alternative. You don't. So if you really want to have more influence potential, you need to think about what are the things that are stopping me from getting ahead in the world? And basically, how am I stopping myself from getting ahead in the world? And how can I become aware of these issues? And it's amazing how many women look at this checklist of 12 things and say about 7 of them, average women, about 7 of them relate to me. And it's just very, very, very common. Women worry more. They ruminate more about things. And that can make them appear indecisive. Another issue that women have, which, as you mentioned, is strength and weakness. Women have, as Sally has talked about, a better radar screen. They're more sensitive.
No doubt about that.
Sensitive to everything that's going on around them, which is typically good. The problem is when you're with the board of directors, they're not interested in everything that's going on around. I just want you to get to the punchline.
Right.
Be concise. Get to the punchline. So again, pretty much everything in the book, we're talking about strengths that are very useful at one level can get in the way at the next level. Just in the same way in my book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, the same thing. It talks about this, for example, incredible desire to win and be right. Well, when you're at the bottom, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when you get to the top, you got to quit doing that. You quit be right all the time. You got to sit there and say, wait a minute, now I'm a CEO. My job is to help them be right.
Yeah, you know what I love about, again, I think going back to this point is that someone could look at that title, How Women Rise, and they go, this is just about like going up the ladder. But I love what you're saying because it's so true. Rising is about influence.
That's
and
it.
And by the way, it's okay if you want to rise just to rise. There's nothing wrong with wanting to rise just because you want a bigger salary or you want a corner office. And if that's your thing, this book will probably help you. But for most people, and especially I think for women, even more than men, though again, it's true of both sexes, the desire to influence and to make a difference. And the other thing I love what you said earlier is, and I know we agree on this, is that I think we all agree if more women were in places of authority and influence in major companies, in politics, et cetera, that the society would be better. And by the way, the research shows that heterogeneous groups generally, more diverse groups, not just because they're women, but just having that diversity is going to make a huge difference. And women have so much unique things to contribute. So what I love is this book has the chance to actually, I hadn't thought of this, but it connects our two books in a way, to fuel the purpose revolution. Because I believe if we had more women in these positions of authority, it would actually lead to more purpose. It would drive more conversations about legacy and contribution, not just about profit and performance. And so I think that in some ways there's a link there between the two concepts.
And it's very interesting. Many women, not many, statistically more women than men, have a negative view of the term ambition.
Yes. Yeah.
Men, ambition is seen as something very positive. Get ahead, make it, go for it. For women, ambition is associated more with greediness or selfishness. And so we talk about, look, there's nothing wrong with ambition. And if you believe in the product, sell it.
That's right.
Typically, when I work in women's programs, I say, do you believe in yourself? They say, yes. Would this company be better off or worse off if you got promoted? Company be better off.
Right. Yeah.
And guess what? Go for it.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking one of the people I interviewed for the book is a man, but Darren Entwistle, the CEO of TELUS. But I love what he said, and it's very relevant to what you just said about purpose. He said, this is not about killing the competitive spirit. It's about channeling it for doing good. And so I think that turning this idea of ambition around to if I am ambitious for more influence, ambitious to have more of a legacy, ambitious to have more of a positive influence. And as you said so often, and I think it is more true of women than men, but many men suffer from that too, of just not feeling dirty or naughty about your ambition or embarrassed by it, right? I remember once a woman friend of mine, a coach, saw me do a presentation and they were selling my books afterwards. And this was years ago. And I said, no, my books are at the back. And no, you probably don't want to buy them. And if, I'm kind of embarrassed telling you them. And she came up to me afterwards and said, well, why did you do that? And I said, well, because I didn't want to look, too, ambitious, too much just about. She said, do you believe those books will help people? Yes. She said, have they helped people? I said, yeah, thousands of people. She said, then why don't you act that way? And I think it really relates to this ambition, too, for a woman or a man, right, to say, well, there's nothing wrong with being ambitious. If your ambition is to make a difference, then be proud of that ambition and don't, be ashamed of it.
That's right. I like that. That's the whole essence of the positioning of the book, that don't be ashamed to be ambitious. Don't be ashamed to go for it. Don't be ashamed to try to make a bigger difference in the world. The world's probably going to be better off if you do this, so go for it. And don't leave it to somebody else.
I love it.
If you're not in that job, somebody else is going to be.
Yeah, indeed. And they may not add as much value as you will to the world or to your people.
That's right. Now, back to purpose.
Yeah.
Happiness and meaning to me are two critically important variables. And John, one thing you might not have thought about, I've done 6 programs in my house with retiring CEOs. I'm just getting ready to do number 7. And the topic is, what are you going to do now? Well, what we found, and it goes directly back to what you're doing, you can't just play crappy golf with old men at the country club and eat chicken salad sandwiches all day and talk about gallbladder surgery. You really need to look at purpose and meaning and say, what's important in life? So I think if we look at our phases of life, I've worked with a lot of people. I'm 69. I've worked with a lot of people my age, 65, 70, and they're dealing with that issue of what now? And, what you talk about is so important to that group. If you can just take a second maybe and talk about how what you're talking about relates not just to younger people, but I find it's very, very important for older people.
Very relevant. And interestingly, we talk about this in the book. The research shows the 2 most purpose-focused generations are the millennials and the baby boomers. And because they're kind of like at what I call the Peggy Lee phase of life. If you're a baby boomer, you remember the song, Is That All There Is? And they're starting to say, look, I don't just want to make money. I want to have a contribution. And so many, I think of the story of 7th generation telling me that they stole the guy who invented Fantastic, one of the greatest cleaning products of all time. And he left towards the end of his career for a salary cut because he said, I don't just want to create cleaning products. I want to create cleaning products that'll make a better world for my grandchildren.
Right.
And it's really more personal than that. And, as you know, Marshall, in terms of aging, we know that when people continue to have a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, they live longer, they're healthier. And you and I both know people like Francis, who you mentioned, who used to run the Girl Scouts, who is now, how old is Francis now?
102.
102. So I remember there was a PBS special years ago about how to live to be 100. And they said that genetics only gets you to about your mid-80s. So your mid-80s is a great predictor of whether you die in your midlife or not, right? But once you get to about 85, it's actually a sense of purpose is a much better predictor of whether you get to be, a healthy 95 or 100-year-old, right? And so I think that's why we slanted so much of the book around the personal. How do you find your purpose as a leader? How do you identify it? How do you figure out what your legacy is? How do you figure out where you want to contribute? Because the stakes are so high. I always think in my talks on purpose, and I'm often talking about the business side of purpose, but there's one line I use at the end that is the one line everyone comes up to me and talks about at the end of the talk, which is, if you can't sing the song that you came to sing in the company or role you're in right now, you owe it to your life to either find a place where you can sing that song or to find a way to sing that song where you are. And I'm amazed how many people come up and they're so hungry for that sense of personal purpose. And so but I think at that's a critical stage at retirement a critical stage towards the end of your career where it can just you can just peter almost like a top slowly spinning until you fall over. Or you can, as my grandfather, I would say, he got younger until he died because he still had that sense of purpose. So I think you're right. That's an age group very relevant. So don't think, boy, I'm 60 as I am, or 69 or 55. Too late for me to worry about purpose. No. This is actually the time you may be worrying about it even more than ever.
Well, the other thing I've learned is, I could put a lot of the things that I see in these groups with older people on Saturday Night Live. One guy... wife said, he was a general in the military. His wife said she wanted to be home, right? He said, I made it 3 months. He said, after 3 months, I was in the kitchen alphabetizing the cans. So he looks at his wife and goes, baked beans. Should that be B-A for baked or perhaps B for bean? His wife says, get out, get out. Well, you can't sit there and go from president of the World Bank or 4-star general in the Army to playing bad golf and alphabetizing cans. It just does not work. You've got to find meaning in what you're doing. And by the way, the amusing yourself is good only to a point. After about the 9th cruise, those cruise director jokes are not really that funny.
Yeah.
That's all empty. Is it, and so you really need to sit there and say, am I doing something that matters here? Am I finding purpose? Am I making a difference in life? And to me, the important thing about purpose and meaning is it has to come from your heart. Yes. I cannot tell you what's most important for you. On the other hand, you can tell you what's most important for you. So I love your analogy about singing. That was a great
yeah.
example.
One of the things we talk about in the book, a really practical idea, is to have every person on your team identify their purpose. The purpose in their life and their purpose for them in their job. And we tell a wonderful story about a large law firm we were working with, and the main receptionist at the headquarters, when it came her turn, the head of the firm said, well, Lisa, we all know what your purpose is. Your purpose is to be the first impressionist for the law firm. You make the first impression when people come in. And Lisa said, well, you're right. That's an important part of my job, but that's not my purpose. She said, I've been thinking about it since you guys have been asking me that question. And she said, I'm a very positive, optimistic person. And my purpose is there are a lot of people in the world who aren't. And all day long in my job and all day after work in my life, I want every person who interacts with me, whether it's for 1 minute or 3 minutes, to get a shot of positivity and happiness so that when they leave me, they are more optimistic and happy about the world than before they left. And that leader told me it transformed the whole way he saw her. So when he would pass her in the morning and she was with the grumpiest client, he would catch her at lunch and say, well, Lisa, you were living your purpose. But the interesting thing, Marshall, is she had never identified it. And it transformed her own life to have been even asked that question. What is your purpose? So I think many times as leaders, we're afraid to ask those kinds of questions, but our people are actually hungry to be asked and to answer those kinds of questions about their life.
Well, it's interesting because in my book, Triggers, I talk about 6 questions to challenge yourself with every day. And they all begin with the question, did I do my best to? And one of the 6 questions is, did I do my best to find meaning? So part of it is you want the company to provide meaningful work for you, and you want the company to care about meaning. But your analogy of the receptionist is great. She was doing her best to find meaning. She wasn't waiting for the company to give her meaning. She was creating meaning in her own life. And what we found is if you really get people to say, am I doing my best? Am I doing my best to be happy, to find meaning? Am I doing my best to build relationships? If you get people focused on that, it's really, the company should do everything they should do. On the other hand, the individual say, what can I do without the company doing anything? I'm sure there are other receptionists who are bitter and cynical and negative, right? And probably in the same type of company. Well, the difference is on the inside sometimes, not just on the outside.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's such a, and so, someone might look, for example, the purpose of revolution, say this is all about like what the company has to do for the person, but this is about what we can do for ourselves, but also how do we help people do that for themselves. And I love, by the way, those techniques you teach around these questions you ask yourself every day. It's such a powerful tool for change. Hey, while I'm thinking of it, I want to put a slide up on the screen for a moment. By the way, if you have questions, please ask. Marshall and I got some more things we want to talk about. I'm just going to put this up there for a moment. Opportunity for you, and that is today, if you order both of our books on Amazon, I bet between them on Kindle for $20, you could probably get both of them, or pretty close, right? If you order both of our books and let us know, we're going to give you a special bonus here in the next couple of days. One is you will get immediate access to a special electronic edition of my book, Stepping Up, about how taking personal responsibility can really change your life. Marshall was kind enough to do the foreword for that book, and also access to a special Leading on Purpose video from our sustainment series that we normally sell for quite a bit of money, and you'll get access, something you can share with your team and other leaders as well as yourself. So if you go to purposerevolutionbook.com, you'll have a chance there to let us know that you ordered both books, and we'd love to send you those bonus offers. And so anyway, we know you'll enjoy both of those books. So purposerevolutionbook.com. Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So we're going to give you a chance to ask some questions. But Marshall, I have actually, let's do a couple of questions here. So maybe that's not a question. It's a comment. Oh, we got lots of them here. So maybe Ainsley, you can go through those questions and chime in a moment with one. So Marshall, quick question before we get to the questions from Ainsley, because we got a lot of folks on the line here. Is what's most interesting for you right now, just in your life and work generally? What's really most getting you up in the morning right now and getting you excited that you're working on?
I'm working on my newest big book. It's called Leading Your Own Life. It's very, very aligned with the stuff you're teaching on purpose. I'll give you we've talked about some good news. Let me give you a little bad news in the world today. YouTube. Do you know the number one visited YouTube site in the world going into last year? Do you know what it was?
No, but I think you're about to tell us, I'm afraid.
PewDiePie. Watching some racist guy from Sweden sit there and play video games 17 billion times somebody visited that site. Not million, 17 billion. Number two most visited site is World Wrestling. So what you see is, and I'm going to talk about in the book, the importance of lead your own life. Don't watch somebody play video games. Don't watch people pretend to wrestle. Go out and lead your own life and do something that makes a positive difference. You been to my condominium in New York before?
I have been. I've stayed there.
Nice place. One of my neighbors was...
Not when you were there, but I've stayed there. Yeah.
Well, one of my neighbors was a young woman, Lindsay Lohan. How many millions of hours around the world have spent people reading Lindsay Lohan got drunk and stoned and all that? Well, one of the things I want to talk about in our book is if you ever think my neighbor Lindsay Lohan is a loser, just remember one thing. She's not wasting her life reading about you. What the point here is, and I think it's totally consistent with what you said, and I love the song analogy, live your own life. Live your own life. Find your own meaning. Don't sit there and live Lindsay Lohan's life or the life of other people or the athletic team or watch some guy play video games or wrestling. Right. You don't have a great life. Live your own life. And you're not going to get a lot of meaning watching some guy play video games or watching the World Wrestling Federation. And I think really important, by the way, if you have kids, the average kid that's flunking out of school in America spends 55 hours a week on non-academic media. 55 hours a week, that's an addiction. And very important to have kids, especially, to talk about the stuff you're talking about, meaning what matters in life, live your own life, and don't get lost in this distraction of video games and watching people play video games and wrestling and all that stuff because they don't care about you.
Yeah, I like it. That's good. It's good. And I look forward to reading that, by the way. That's great. Sounds like a great book. And I know you do a lot of great work around that. When I hear often we may not know that about each other, but often like I'll speak somewhere where they had you or you'll speak somewhere where they had me. And like often people say, well, Marshall, it just really got me thinking about my life, right? And so I think you have a great gift of getting people just to think about how they're leading their own life. It's such an important question for people. Good. So, Ainsley, any question you want to tee up for us here?
Sure, here's one for either of you. I've been told about the need to soft pitch ideas when presenting to male executives to not show too much passion or confidence. Is there a balance there for women to be successful?
Go ahead, Marshall.
I'll go first on that one. I think you've been given some bad advice. People that care always do better than people that don't care. And if you have passion, I don't think it's bad that people see your passion. So I would really question that advice. I think it plays into some unfortunate and perhaps negative stereotypes that lead women to downplay themselves, to downplay the importance of what they're doing. And I think, if you believe in it, let people know you believe in it.
Yeah, and I would I echo 100% what Marshall said. The thing I would also add to that is that if you look at research on why we admire people, why people get promoted, being passionate, being enthusiastic is a very strong predictor of both being admired and being promoted. And so I think show your passion and don't be afraid of it. And I always think of my friend Howard Bahar, who ran the whole international operation for Starbucks. He wrote a book called "It's Not About the Coffee." And when Howard, even though he wasn't a woman, of course, he had a style which was to be confrontive, and he was not in the norm at Starbucks. And when he first got promoted to the senior team, one of the kind of more older guys said to him, "Howard, now that you're on the senior team, you got to tool it back a little bit. Be a little more careful. Don't be so passionate. Start wearing a tie like everybody else." Long story short, Howard did that. He took that bad advice. And then Howard Schultz came up to him a few months later and said, "Howard, what the hell happened to you? We promoted you because of your passion, because you would challenge us, and now you're just like everybody else. I'm beginning to think we made a mistake." So be careful. Be yourself, as Marshall said, because that is the very thing you bring that will light the house on fire. And that person most likely is jealous of the fire they see in you. It's a pretty good chance. And just like that guy probably said, "Oh, Howard, be like me." No, be yourself. And it served Howard pretty well, because not only was he on the senior team, eventually Howard Schultz gave him the entire operation outside of the United States. So I think it was good advice to be himself. Ainsley, any other question you want to tee up for us?
Sure, here's one for Marshall. This is on how women rise. What was the single most surprising insight you got while writing it?
I think the single most surprising insight that I got in the book is the insight about sacrificing your career for your job. Sally, by the way, I did not come up with this idea. 80% of this book I did not come up with. Sally is the lead author. I'm the second author, so I like to be clear about that. I don't want to get too much into me. This is a concept that Sally really helped me understand. I've never even heard that before. How easy it is for us to sacrifice our career for a job. And John, I'm going to give you a personal example from another friend of ours, Rick Cullen. I was working at the New York Stock Exchange, and Rick was head of leadership development. And I did a program, and I got ranked 4.8 out of 5. And I said to Rick, "How can I do better?" And Rick said, "You're solving the wrong problem. You got 4.8 out of 5. All right, maybe you can get the 4.9 out of 5, or maybe not. Some people don't get 5s. What you really need to be doing is writing, thinking, focusing on your larger career, not just trying to change this 4.8 to a 4.9. Well, that was some of the best career advice I ever got in my life. In our book, it talks about and I'm a man, I was doing it. Women are more likely to do that, sacrifice our career for the job. And that you've got like 95% quality, but now you try to get it to 100. Well, you're never going to get to 100 anyway. And the difference between that 95 and 98 can take so much time and energy away from you that you're not really investing on your future to get to that next level, that you're not thinking about the next job. You're not building those relationships because you're trying to get where you are perfect. And so many women have much more of this need to be perfect and to get the job right. And so that concept, don't sacrifice your career for your job, really hit me and applied to my own life too, as well as the book. So that was a real breakthrough for me.
Yeah, that's great. It's a beautiful, important concept. I really like that. Got a great comment from Leas Fonseca from Boston in Brazil. I may not be pronouncing the name properly, so great. Thanks, guys, for the great talk about success, women in purpose. I love this. She said, "I love the topic and work as a purpose accelerator." What a great job title, or maybe that is just your dharma in the world. But, it reminds me when I saw that comment that some people might say, hey, I work in a company that doesn't have a real sense of purpose. How do I do that if I'm not the CEO, if I don't run the company? And one of the things we really talk about in the book is that every one of us can create that pod of purpose in our company. And if you create that, it can often be contagious. And one of my favorite stories in the book is about Ray Anderson, who was kind of one of the really probably crusaders for sustainability when he ran Interface Carpeting. And everyone said, oh, Ray Anderson changed the carpeting industry. But the interesting thing most people don't know is Ray Anderson hadn't given sustainability a thought in his life until in the mid-1990s, 3 of his salespeople came to him and said, our customers are asking some different questions, Ray. Are our carpets recycled? What about toxins we use? What happens to the waste? We don't really know how to answer their questions. We think we should look at. And then they said, Ray, thanks for permission to do the group. Would you come to our first meeting and share your vision for sustainability for our company? And Ray said, well, I guess so. And then he realized, my God, I've never even thought about it. And to make a long story short, not only did he come up with a vision for that meeting, but his company became one of the leading people in the purpose revolution. But it didn't begin with Ray Anderson. It began with a few salespeople who said, I'm going to be a purpose accelerator. So don't feel like, purpose acceleration is just for the CEO. So I love that comment from Brazil. We're all purpose accelerators, not only in our own lives, but in the companies that we're in. Ainsley, any other question you want to tee up?
Yes, John, this is a question for you. Do you have recommendations for male-dominated companies to support and advance women's influence?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We've been doing, earlier I asked Marshall what he was doing these days, and ironically, he's writing a book on how women rise. And I've just co-founded with a few colleagues at the University of British Columbia something called the Men's Initiative, which is dedicated to doing deep work with men all over the world to really move men to a more productive, constructive, masculinity for the world. And we're doing some fascinating things, including a Good Men in Sport program with male professional athletes that we're starting later this year. But, I think that in the Men's Initiative, we've done some work with Heineken Mexico, and it's the largest Heineken company in the world, and very male dominated, of course, because it's a beer business, and Mexico tends to be a kind of machismo culture. I'm not saying that that most Mexicans would agree with that, right? So I'm not just saying that out of line. And the interesting thing is, one of the 3 things they've done that have really, I think, made a big difference. One is that they have no quotas for hiring women in leadership positions, but you have to have at least X number of female candidates in your final list of people that you look at. Because often what happens is the women don't get to the final screening, but once you get them because of that internal bias, and it's actually worked pretty well because people don't like a quota for how many you have necessarily, but they're okay with a quota for having people in the final list, and then many of those women do indeed rise. The second thing is that we did with Heineken Mexico was develop a program to get the men talking about being more inclusive. And we know that the dominant group has a big impact on whether the less dominant group, whatever the dominant group is, if it was all women, it'd be the same thing, on how the other groups feel included. And often men don't really know the subtle ways that they make it difficult for women to be leaders in an organization. And so I think having open dialogue about that, and often it's good getting the men talking with just the men, because they'll be more honest with each other and then begin to have those conversations. And the third thing, I think, for women to be really forthright about the challenges they face. One organization we were working with in the men's initiative, there was only one senior team member who was a woman. And all we did was open up the chance for her to talk about what is it like to be the only woman leader. Because someone said, oh, you're lucky, you're the only one. And we said, well, how do you feel about that? And she said, well, you really want to know what it's like to be the only woman? And you can't imagine how many hearts that opened up with the men. So I think women should take advantage of opportunities to share what it's like to be in a male-dominated culture in a not accusatory way. Not you've done this to me, but just this is what it's like to not be in the majority. And I find most men, once they hear that, at least that's been my experience, their empathetic heart opens up, because when you have privilege is invisible if you have it. And so because of that, most men don't even know the subtle things they might do that make it difficult for women. So those are 3 ideas, and Marshall may have something to add.
I just have one, and we talk about in the book. Many women are given this terrible message of, you have to be a role model for all other women. Mm. And if you make a mistake, you've let down every woman who came before you and every woman who came after you. And, you just screwed up the world. And that's an impossible burden to carry around. Minority women, even worse. If you make a mistake, you let down every African American, and why not all Hispanics and Asians? And you just let down at least 2/3 of the world that were disappointed because you screwed up. Well, one of the things that I typically work with on my women's classes is you don't have to buy into this. You have to be a role model for all women. You show up, you're a good human being, you do your best, and make peace. Nobody should carry that around. And not too many old white men are sitting there going, oh, I've got to be a role model for all the old white men today. Well, and not too many white guys are thinking about that. So why should a woman have to carry that around? And John, back to your point, men, I don't think ever intentionally dump that on women to be mean or disrespectful. They think they're doing them a favor. Just like the example you used, you're not really doing anybody a favor when you try to tell some woman she has to be a role model for all other women. And also, unfortunately, mentoring, women at the top can be driven crazy for the expectation they have to mentor every woman who ever existed. They have to speak in every women's leadership program, and that they have to carry this ball for all women, as opposed to saying, look, it's hard enough just to do your job, to be a good person, a good family member, to take care of your health and do your job is hard. You shouldn't be expected to have to, just because you're a woman. You have to be a mentor for all women. You have to speak in every women's program. And if you don't, you have to feel shamed and guilty and what's wrong with you. Well, I try to really focus to help women. You don't have to buy into that stuff. A woman was head of Palm Pilot, gave a great speech. You know what she said? I do my job, which is a CEO. It's a very hard job. I take care of my kids, my family, and I take care of my health. That's about it. She said, I'd love to do more of this other stuff, but I just don't have time. I can't do everything for everyone. It was such a liberating message for the women in the room to hear that, she was given this talk, but she doesn't give that many in a year, and she doesn't feel this obligation to run around and do 1,000 women's programs and be a mentor for all women just because she's in a high level. You got to do your job.
Yeah, I love it. True. So true. Very, very, very good. So look, our time is almost up here. I just want to, before I thank Marshall, remind you that, again, we love that you joined us, whether you get the books or not. But obviously, I can say every book Marshall's ever written, I have loved. I know you're going to love, and Sally is amazing. So I know you're going to love How Women Rise. Please order it. It's coming out in a few weeks now, right, Marshall? Pre-order it. Our book out just a couple weeks ago, The Purpose Revolution. And again, if you buy them both today and let us know, go to purposerevolutionbook.com and we'll send you some instant access to some special offers. Marshall, any parting words before we say hasta la vista?
No, thank you so much for inviting me to work with you. You're a good friend. We've known each other for many, many years. I love your work, and I'm always honored to be able to work with you. So, John, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Marshall. The feeling is mutual, and I love your work, and you always get me thinking and inspired, and you've done that again today. And thank you for joining us. By the way, we will be sending out a copy of the video as well that you can watch again or share with many others, and we encourage you to do that. So again, thanks again for giving us a part of your time, and thanks, Marshall, for joining me today. So have a great day. As Marshall said, life is good, and if it isn't good today, go out and make it good. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us.